Welcome to Nadine at 9. I am getting a call in right this second, so join me. Welcome to Nadine at 9. Are you there? It might help.
Hello.
It might help if I. It might help if I turn up the volume. Hey, it's Nadine at 9. Who's this?
Hey, Nadine, it's Nathan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're calling.
Hi.
You're calling early.
Well, yeah, I guess I came in about a minute early. That's
Oh
good
no!
for me.
I thought you were calling at 9:15.
Oh, I thought it was 9.
Well, I just started at 9, so
Okay.
you can help me introduce yourself because I haven't told anyone what.
Sure,
This
or I
is
can hang up and pretend like this never happened. You call back in 15 minutes.
right.
So whichever
Yeah.
you prefer.
Well, no, it's fine. This is Nathan Bechtold. He is my guest today, so he gets to help welcome all of you to the show this morning. Nathan is an editor at Lake Expo. I actually think he's a little bit more than an editor, but he told me to tell you he's just an editor. So anyway, he's my guest this morning because I wanted to talk a little bit about unbiased journalism, and how you can do that when you care passionately about something. But I also thought it'd be interesting to talk about censorship because that's always a huge thing. And I have been listening to some podcasts about Woodrow Wilson and hearing quite a bit about his form of censorship that started in the early 1900s. It's pretty incredible, not in a good way. But anyway, so Nathan is going to chat with us about those things today. But if you want to just say hello to everyone, tell them who you are, we can get going.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on today, Nadine. And, yeah, I'm the editor at Lake Expo. I have been doing the stuff I do at Lake Expo, which is running our newsroom side of things. Since 2013 is when I came aboard to do that full time. So the year 11 now, I guess.
Wow.
And yeah, and I've learned a lot about journalism. I wasn't actually a journalism major. Sometimes I think that actually is an asset, frankly, to me. But I didn't major in journalism. I majored in philosophy at Dallas Baptist University and minored in English. I'd always been a writer and kind of had a love-hate relationship with writing. I was kind of naturally gifted at it, but sometimes hated writing, but was regularly told that was what I would be doing at some point. And so it turns out that's what I'm doing. and then I pursued or got a master's degree in liberal arts. It's kind of a great books program out of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and finished that up in 2014, 13 or 14, I can't remember now. And anyways, have been the editor at Lake Expo as my primary thing, involved in the community in a bunch of other ways too. You know, I helped start the Osage Beach Farmers Market a long time ago. Have been in various roles at our church on staff. Deacon at our church currently. I'm a passionate homeschooler. We homeschool our 5. Well, we have 5 kids. 2 of them are a little small for anything formal, but our kids are 13, 10, 8, 3, and 2. So we homeschool them, and yeah, as an editor at Lake Expo, I enjoy just getting to write about this really unique place that we live in, and sometimes I think it's less interesting to introduce myself as a editor, and it's probably, you know, if I introduce myself as a journalist, you know, I probably get things thrown at me. So I like to actually introduce myself sometimes as a storyteller, because I think that's a lot of what we're doing is telling the story, just kind of this unfolding story of a really, really fascinating community that I love and am connected to, and my family's been connected to for, I think over 100 years. I've had family here since before the dam was built. So,
I didn't realize that.
Anyways, there's a little intro.
Yeah. So tell me, like, from your perspective, what do you think makes this area so interesting, so unique?
Man, I think almost any angle that you look at it, the lake is interesting. I think the history, like the well, I think even the history before the dam was built is fascinating about just sort of the poor pioneers trying to scratch out a living out here is interesting. The history of, like even who was here before the pioneers, the Indians that were here, like it has a very interesting pre-dam history, but then the building of the dam, I mean, however deep you want to dig into that, there's drama and controversy and fascinating stories about, we ran a story at Lake Expo several years ago about how they had to move all the gravestones, all the graves out of the areas that they were going to flood.
Right.
And there were over 1,000 of them that they moved, and I think hundreds that they never found. They were told there's a grave over yonder next to yon oak tree, right, or whatever, and Uncle so-and-so is buried there, and they're like, well, there's nothing here. So they would maybe get a shovel full of dirt, put it in a box, and label it with Uncle so-and-so's name and move it. So there's just so many fascinating things, even about the dam being built. And then since then, the way the community has found itself economically, the way the lake has changed in terms of the kinds of people that it draws, the kinds of vacations that, once upon a time, the first 10, 20, maybe 30 years of the lake, it was actually really like a fishing lake with these little fishing cabins and lodges on it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, recreational boating and family vacation from the, 50s through the 70s, and then like power boating and the big stuff kind of took hold. So just that trajectory is interesting. I think economically, the lake still evolving and growing is interesting, trying to move into being a year-round strong economy rather than an economy that goes a million miles an hour from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and then everybody gets laid off kind of deal, which was historically the case. I think the lake is growing out of that, so that's fascinating. Mm-hmm. The lake being a bastion of freedom during COVID and every good thing that came from that from an economic standpoint is fascinating. And then I think too, there's a spirit at the lake. I love it. There's a kind of a fierce, independent spirit in the lake community that you see, and it plays itself out in politics sometimes, but I think in other ways too, in entrepreneurship and different things.
Oh yeah.
Where there's just a beautiful pushback against like government overreach, and there's a suspicion of government here that I love. Mm-hmm. I think it's beautiful and healthy.
It's well founded.
And very founded. Yeah. I mean, literally founded, like, the founders kind of founded, or left England over some very founded suspicions about government power, right? So there's a lot of that, and that's great. And I think that overall that has served the lake well. It makes it kind of a raucous place politically sometimes. It makes it a thorn in the side, I think, of some people politically, but it makes it a lot of fun to watch and, report on and stuff, just from a fascinating standpoint. But also I think there's a lot of good. There's bad too. There's things that happen that are unfortunate and disappointing or whatever, but there's a lot of cool things that happen there. So there you go. That's a broad, I think just, that's what I'm saying. I think every angle you look at the lake, there's just really interesting things that have happened and are happening. And I love getting to tell those stories.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought about it in that broad of a picture before, but everything that you're saying, I completely agree with. That a lot of the things that have made me really love the lake area and appreciate it more, and it's true. There's a lot of different facets to the lake that I think people don't realize is going on here. And one thing that I worked in the restaurant industry for a long time, and I traveled to several different places because I just enjoyed traveling. And when you're a waitress or whatever, you can generally get a job anywhere. And I've always really liked that kind of tourist atmosphere, but I also really like when you live in that place, so then you have a little bit of the downtime in the off season. And it's true. Mm-hmm. I mean, just in the time that I've lived in this area for, I don't know, like 11 years, I have seen the lake change so much from, like what you said, basically just dying after Labor Day, to kind of pushing to Thanksgiving and a little bit to Christmas. And then, we still have a few months, January, February, that are pretty miserable. but otherwise,
pretty slow,
it's, it's just like, it's almost changed to year round. I mean, I know that's how a lot of places in Colorado have gotten too. So it is very interesting. I've definitely grown to love it here, especially because of the freedom that we've experienced that I feel like every city should be experiencing. But there are some strong patriots here who haven't given up on it. So that's great.
Yep. And what's cool is I mean, even again, I think, 2020 was just such a, critical moment.
Yeah.
Nationally, but like for the lake, really specifically, because we got the national attention for something very specific, namely for going, we're not going to just stay closed down until somebody in Washington says we can, we're just going to do what we're going to do.
Absolutely.
And because we became known for that, I think what's interesting is it drew, on the net, I think it drew the kinds of people that found that really attractive.
Yeah.
And that's cool because while, you saw a lot at the lake, and I think you still see, like a lot of, all right, who are all these people coming in from a lot of like very blue places where lockdowns were happening? Are they going to ruin the lake kind of special and very freedom focused spirit? And I kind of lean towards, I don't think so. Obviously all sorts of folks show up here, and communities are just generally usually diverse as they grow. But I think that the reason the lake became what it went to the national stage in 2020, I think it tended to draw the kinds of people that were like, okay, that's appealing.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm hopeful, at least that as it grows, in a way that preserves that kind of fierce commitment to liberty and, that independent spirit and entrepreneurship and all those things that really made it, thrust it to the center stage during the unforgettable time.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
That's my optimism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great how many people are moving here for those exact same reasons that you're saying, is they desire that freedom, and they saw that we value that here. And, it's kind of a running joke around here. It's like, you are welcome to come here, but leave your politics where you came from. So, but it's definitely, those of us that care about it, we have to stay proactive. So one of the ways that we can do that, I'll just sidebar here, is with what you do. You obviously, as a journalist, are supposed to remain unbiased, which I think is so important in helping people get the facts so they can hopefully make their own educated decision about things. And I know just specifically with this past election, with the state rep for District 123 here, there was a lot of garbage going around, and you were able to write on several of those things, and people wrote letters to the editor that were published. That was just, it's so helpful in being able to get a better rounded view of everything that's going on. So I'm not gonna speak too much about, because I know your personal beliefs, but just give kind of like from your perspective as a journalist, when you do care strongly about an issue or a person or something, how do you kind of put that, or do you put that on the back seat while you write an article that tries to remain unbiased? I mean, how, are there certain tricks that you've discovered that can kind of help you do that? Do you think it's important to maintain an unbiased perspective?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because it acknowledges the fact that like every person, and journalists are people, despite despite what some people might think.
Right.
Every person just has biases baked in, right? Like we all have preferences and ideas and context and all that stuff. So, it is challenging to do that. And I think that probably nobody could say that they do it perfectly if they've been doing it for very long at all. But one thing is, so whenever we write a story that we know is going to be kind of controversial, so I have relationships like all over the community with people on both sides of things. Because I have to, like, you know, to do my job, I have to have these good, you know, communicative relationships and stuff. And so professionally and on some level personally, I try to kind of just keep it to myself, you know, because like some people air out every single thought that they have and, you know, fine, whatever. But like, if I do that, then I can end up losing relationships that I need to have and that I think can actually be really valuable. And I don't mean that just purely like in a transactional way. I mean, just, I like having good relationships with people, you know, even just personally. I like having good communication and good rapport. This may be not a good journalism trait, but I kind of think it is. I like giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But I also, as a journalist, go, okay, yeah, but every claim has to be investigated. And so whenever something that's near and dear to my heart or comes up that maybe has to do with somebody I have a relationship with or whatever, I really have to do things that almost maybe intentionally kind of make me uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is, like, I know that I'm probably asking the right questions. If the questions I'm asking about somebody that I like or an issue where I kind of have my own thoughts about it are, if I'm kind of internally pushing back a little at those, then a lot of times that's a good sign, you know, that I ought to at least go down that road and investigate that. Because we kind of have this, it's kind of a joke, but it's actually turned out to be true, that we know that we wrote a story right when we made everybody mad.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously that's not always true, but oftentimes it's the case that, like, the truth of a situation can often lie somewhere in the middle. Again, this is a generalization, right? That's not always
right.
But, like, even sometimes it just makes both sides mad when you talk to the other side and put them on the record saying what they want to say.
True.
You know? So even just doing that, we've often found that if sort of all sides of an issue are a little annoyed at what you published, a lot of times I'm like, all right, then I think we might have come close to getting it right. And again, that's not my only barometer, but I just mean that, you know, we have to sort of go and get these perspectives from these differing sides with, you know, being like finite people with finite amounts of information and a finite amount of time to put it all together, you know, and like try to go, okay, what does everybody say about this? What seems to have happened here? And, you know, just attribute everything that everybody said and write a follow-up story, you know, if more facts come out. So it's challenging. It's like always kind of a dance to try to say only what is verifiable and factual. And sometimes you end up saying something and you didn't know that was, you know, like you find out later, you're like, oh, whoa, okay, I thought that was kind of something we didn't even need to question, and all of a sudden it is, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a process. I would say it's a, like, if it's not a struggle, then you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah, that actually just made me wonder how, because, you know, I feel like this a lot when I'm trying to research things, that you can go on the internet and find a backup for anything that you want to believe is true, basically.
Yeah.
So are there certain outlets that you go to that you really trust, or is it just kind of like with every situation is different, and how do you measure to know if something is an accurate fact or not? Right.
Yeah, well, especially because we do what we do on the local level, there's just not like an abundance of information about a given thing that we're writing about. Generally, you know, on the national level, you can find 100 articles within an hour about any topic, right? So after something happens, or more.
Right.
But locally, Yeah, I think really a lot of it really does go back to that relationship piece that I was mentioning. Just having people that know about things that I don't know about. Because I say this a lot, like in my job, I like have to be this generalist because you have to have a ability to even kind of have a general direction about where you're going with the topic, you know, to kind of know enough about everything from boating to politics to, you know, to economics to real estate, to, you know, like name it. And you got to be able to be conversant in that enough to go, okay, I kind of know the right questions to ask, but of course the downside is that means there's always somebody out there that knows a lot more than me about like any topic that I'm writing about, right?
Right.
Of course there is. So that's what like the relationships are actually, I think, super critical to sorting out what has happened. And again, sometimes you have relationships with multiple people that'll tell you different things. And you then have to lay it all next to each other and go, okay, can we tell what actually happened here? You know, maybe we need to like dig into some court cases or whatever and figure it out. And then in the end, if you still can't quite tell, then you just report, well, this person says this and this person says this, and kind of let folks sort out what they think is true. Sometimes it's not always clear, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's tricky, and it also helps with relationships to have people that'll tell you things off the record that you can keep off the record. They go, you cannot print this for X, Y reason. I'm under a non-disclosure, or I'm not, you know, or you better not print this, you know, whatever. But just so you know, on background, this is the case.
Yeah.
And what that does is I would never print that, but it helps me to go, okay, then I can feel more comfortable saying what I can say, knowing that stuff. So like those are things that journalists do, and again, those are all built around relationships of trust. So like you never ever print something that somebody says this is off the record, right? Because then you just destroy that relationship forever, probably, right? So I don't know. That's kind of an answer, at least. I think really it's very much about relationships with people that know more than I do about specific topics.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had never really thought about that side of it before, but it makes total sense. I mean, that's what you do in everyday life is you hopefully try and surround yourself with people that you trust, and then you learn from them and you bounce ideas off of them, and so it totally makes sense. Has there ever been, I mean, I think you kind of hinted at this, but has there ever been a story that you've written that you've either had to like completely retract or go in and say, this was actually incorrect?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it never feels good.
Yeah.
Never feels good. But without a doubt, yeah. Like, I mean, and I don't even know if I want to enumerate examples, but
fine.
There have been plenty of instances where you got some piece of it wrong.
Right.
Right. And again, it's the classic, like, well, gosh, if I would have known I was getting that wrong, like, I would definitely not have. I don't enjoy retractions or corrections or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So, but you learn more things, and sometimes you don't know that you need to know them until after you've published, despite your best efforts, and you go, oh no, that's helpful information, because somebody calls you and goes, whoa, dude, you missed this by a lot. You know, I mean, that happened recently, actually, for an article I wrote where somebody said, man, the assumptions you were working on here were very wrong. And I was like, oh, yep, wow, sure enough.
Yeah.
And so, you know, depending on how minor it is, sometimes it's a very, very minor, not critical to the story thing. I'll go edit it in the story, and it didn't make a difference to the story. I mean, typos or things like that. But larger stuff, you got to drop an editor's note in there and go, you know, hey, we messed this up. The story's been corrected. We apologize for the error. You know, and that's the best you can do. And hopefully that preserves some credibility. You know, like, the reality is that, like, journalism on the national level has kind of committed suicide from a credibility standpoint in a lot of ways. So it's, you know, journalists tend to be not liked, and news organizations tend to be not liked, and even on the local level, sometimes you get sort of like lumped in with, you know, quote unquote, the media.
Right.
And so when you make a mistake, which is bound to happen, then it just like reinforces that idea of like, oh, there they go again, the lying media. And I'm like, okay, I like to differentiate myself from certain, national outlets that just like traffic in nonsense and lies, but it's frustrating when that happens. But you just got to make a correction and keep working on trying to get things right and trying to build credibility with your audience. And it helps to have a relationship with your audience. And on the local level, I think you can do that. And so that's good, because I think on the net, despite mistakes, we're trusted by and large to really work to get things right. And our audience comes back because they think it's worthwhile to read what we're publishing. So that's encouraging when you have traffic and like traffic on your website. I mean, you have viewers and that's growing. That doesn't always mean you're telling the truth. Sometimes there's some terrible organizations that have a lot of viewers, but it's encouraging, especially when you hear from people that they appreciate the attempts you're making to get it right. So there you go. That was kind of long-winded, but
yeah, for sure. And I was just gonna say, I mean, I feel like when I have read the articles that you've done, I'm always pretty impressed with how well you're able to give an unbiased perspective in what you're writing, and that it is very accurate, the things that you're saying, whether, like I said, I mean, I know you on a personal level, and so I know that sometimes the things that you're writing about might not totally, it's not something that you would have a personal conversation and maybe support the same thing. But I just, like I said, I mean, I think that's so important. And like you said, there's a total lack of that, especially on a national level. But why do you think that is? Why do you think that journalism has kind of moved in this direction of just being really one-sided? Why do you, and I mean, even some media outlets just tell blatant lies. What do you think that people are just so cut off from reality that they think they're telling the truth, or do you think that they are just desensitized and caring anymore?
Yes. I think probably all of the above, really. I think, man, I mean, that's like, all right, we're going to need a couple hours here, but obviously I would just try to condense it. But I think culturally, we don't, like, as a culture, we care less about the truth. We're kind of the, the Pontius Pilate to Jesus, right? Like, what is truth?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think that's sort of the, like, broadly as a culture, fewer and fewer people care about something called truth. I remember even I was taught at State Fair Community College now about 10 years ago, and I remember having conversations with students there about truth versus kind of subjectivity and this whole concept of like your truth, which is nonsense. That's just ridiculous. But and there was so much of that in these young people of like, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, that's not a real thing. Like, there's just true. And we can talk about, like, if you want to say true for you, like, you like that thing and I don't like that thing. Well, that's fine, but let's not use the word true there. Or use, like, a preference or something.
Right.
So, point is, I think truth has been kind of just, we just like, launched it out away from anything that we're interested in a long time ago. So there's that. And then I think, too, in some unfortunate ways, I think the way the internet and publishing on the internet especially, but it's not just internet, TV and stuff, works is you got to get the views.
True.
You got to get eyeballs to sell ads, right? I mean, that's literally what we do, right? We want an audience, and then we want businesses who want to reach that audience. Like, that's what we do. But sometimes in situations, the unfortunate side effect is people will do anything for the views.
Yeah.
And so maybe it starts with kind of fudging the facts, but then it comes down to just bald-faced lies about all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Because, and again, I think sometimes you almost can't find a way out of it. If you've created an audience, what's the saying? I'm going to get it wrong, but like, what you win them with is what you have to keep them with, or something like that. I totally butchered that phrase. But if you grow an audience through this kind of admixture of lies and truth, then you have to keep them with that, right? Because you created a certain kind of audience and expectation from that audience. And so I think almost becomes there's no way out for some organizations that grew, you know what I mean, like a viewership or whatever through telling lies. And that's like, well, that's what you got to do now. I mean, maybe they don't even care. But
yeah,
so I think it becomes this sort of self-reinforcing thing that you find all over the place. Yeah, there's a lack of interest in truth, a lack of belief that there actually is truth, sort of objectively. And again, and then the result of that, I think, is that people just look for things that reinforce their own perspectives. The other thing, too, is that nobody wants to be uncomfortable. Like, literally, none of us like being uncomfortable. That's almost like the definition of uncomfortable, right? Like, you don't like it.
Right.
And so I think that especially when we become a society that's less, frankly, I think less philosophical, less introspective, less acknowledging of the fact that sometimes the truth differs from what we believe, and we have to be willing to, I mean, like, you know, the Christian term is repent, right? But like, go, oh, wow, I got that very wrong, and this is going to require me to change.
Yeah.
So whenever we have a society that doesn't really believe in those things, you know, it's like, well, then anything goes.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of just loss of, like, humility. And, you know, to where it's like, well, then all I want now, I don't like to be uncomfortable. I don't believe in truth. So what I want is just something that just reinforces what I already think, and that makes me comfortable, and I can, you know, tap the like button and feel good about myself, and I think I have all the right opinions, and I move on, right? So, I don't know. That's at least partly of an answer. There's probably a lot more, but that's my thought.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true, and it's really sad, because to me, when people are saying, like, oh, it's my truth, or it's your truth, or whatever, clearly people are hungry for truth, and they're just not getting the absolute truth from, you know, from Scripture, where that's the absolute truth. They're not getting that, and so, but because they're hungry for it, they're trying to make it up from somewhere else. And yeah, I completely agree. There's just such a lack of that, and it just keeps going round and round in our culture, for sure. I'm going to kind of switch gears a tiny bit, because I think that I've actually been listening to this podcast series that Glenn Beck does, and he recently did one about Woodrow Wilson, which I already knew some, you know, Wilson did some terrible things. But specifically regarding censorship, he was awful. His administration, and I don't know how much you've studied about this, but his administration was, I mean, like, there's a quote from Andrew Bailey, or the current Missouri Attorney General, saying that one of the Supreme Court rulings about censorship, what did he say? He said, oh, it's the biggest violation of First Amendment in our nation's history. And after listening to the stuff about Woodrow Wilson and what his administration does, I was like, that I don't even think that what's happening right now honestly comes even that close to what was happening in the early 1900s, specifically around World War I. They were literally controlling every single media outlet there was. And now, you know, they can try and control it to a certain extent, but there are still a lot of outlets that specifically conservatives have that can't be controlled by a progressive leftist agenda. So along with that, you know, there were these two Supreme Court rulings back in 1919. One, I believe, was Schneck versus the U.S., and then Abrams versus the U.S., where these two men were, you know, they were being charged with basically, like, inciting, not necessarily violence, but telling people maybe a different side of the war perspective than the Wilson administration wanted. And so anyway, the Supreme Court ruled that they could not distribute these pamphlets that were a socialist perspective and were anti-war and were supposedly trying to encourage men not to go into the draft. So the Supreme Court ruled that their First Amendment rights were not protected because you have to take into consideration the heart and the circumstances around what someone is saying. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that with regard to First Amendment rights. Do you think that there is a time and a place that your First Amendment rights should be restricted?
No. No, I don't. I think, speech that we find, speech that's untrue, even, should absolutely be protected. Speech that which, by the way, not to go down the rabbit trail, but just back to my earlier point of when you have a society that becomes very unphilosophical and sort of uncritical, when you have a society where, frankly, the schools have been, in many ways aren't teaching like examination, logic, and critical thinking the way they ought to be, when the whole process of education can often become about passing a test. You hear teachers at schools complain about this, right? Like that you have a lot of that. You have this sort of it creates people who are not critical thinkers, and then the net result of that is that they're like is a society that I think kind of decays because you have a society where free speech is protected, and like we were talking about earlier, people can lie, and that's protected speech, and I think it should be.
Right.
But when you have a lot of people who don't, think critically or examine things, willing to question their own take on stuff, that's not good for a culture, right? Because you have free speech, and you need to have free speech, but that's predicated in a way on having people who will think critically about things like that. So that said, no, I think, yes, I think your First Amendment rights should be protected no matter what. There are obviously what you could call carve-outs that I don't really think are carve-outs, like making a credible threat to somebody, right? Like some of those things, I'm not, okay, like I don't, like I'm not saying that should be protected. Like I'm going to go do this thing now, and it's like, oh, you know what I mean? Like some of those things are not considered under free speech, and I'm not worried about that. But like saying that you oppose the government's policies or the draft, or like criticizing the government or whatever, like all that stuff should absolutely be protected speech. Otherwise, again, you just create a societal echo chamber, and you kind of create like a black market on free speech, right? So speech you find offensive should be legal, all that stuff. And again, like you're saying, the most concerning curtailments on speech come from the government because, kind of almost the definition of government is that it has a monopoly on violence, right? So the government is the only one that can throw you in a box for however long it wants, and there's nobody to like get it in trouble for that, right? Like if I go get somebody and throw them in a box, when that gets found out, I'm in big trouble, right?
Yeah.
But the government can do that, and if it wants to do that because you, like we were talking about with Wilson, where that actually, it sounds like that happened. Again, I'm not real familiar with those instances. I'm going to read about those now, but where you could say a thing, and they go throw you behind bars for a while.
Right.
That's really dangerous when the government can do that. Wilson was trouble all the way around.
Yeah, for sure. Lots of.
But he wasn't the first to do this, right? Like, you have the Alien and Sedition Act that John Adams signed, right? Like one of our founders. He signed the Alien Sedition Act. So they're horrible. Like it was like, in fact, what Wilson, I'm looking just a little bit about it, ended up signing was something like, I forget what it was called, but it was like a sedition act.
Yeah, it was.
Espionage and Sedition Act, or something like that. And so it's like, man, so you guys took a play right out of John Adams and that let Congress's book, over 100 years before. And it was bad then, and it was bad when Wilson did it, and it was bad when our government does it now. Yeah. So it's dangerous. And it's not good for a society that is built around the ideas of freedom and the Bill of Rights specifically articulate that stuff. And so, no, I don't think that speech should be curtailed in those.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in the Supreme Court decision back in 1919, one of the things that the justice wrote in his, I just totally blanked on, what is it called when they give their verdict on the ruling? Oh, I just lost it. Anyway.
What, the opinion or
yes.
the dissenting opinion?
The opinion. That's such a hard word.
Okay.
So one of the things that he referenced, which, I'm sure that people have heard this before, is that free speech isn't protected in a situation where you're in a crowded theater and you yell fire, and then it incites this panic inside the theater. Right. So free speech is not protected in that situation. And I've always, again, I'm a black and white person, and so I just think like, well, why is it that it's only protected in certain circumstances and not in other circumstances? To me, I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, should someone be allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater, even if it incites panic?
Right. That's funny. I mean, again, this is one of these things that's like a whole interesting conversation. If someone shouts fire in a crowded theater, like if somebody shouts water in a crowded theater, people are like, who's shouting?
Yeah.
Right. If somebody shouts fire, like it's very likely that real harm is about to happen. Right. Like a stampede is imminent, unless it's some terrible recent Hollywood movie and there's like 8 people there. Right. But
true.
Otherwise, and so this comes down to, should government have control of anything at all anywhere, right? And so, society currently says, well, yeah, it should, and we want law and order, and so this is what that looks like. And then we lean on Supreme Court decisions to kind of like suss out the finer details of that. Again, going back to like, if somebody publishes their 18-point plan about how they are going to, assassinate the president. I know that's just totally like a hypothetical here, right?
Right, like that would never happen.
Yeah, right. But if somebody publishes that, and it's found that like, no, this isn't like some rambling of this looks like this is something that somebody is actually imminently going to do and has the means to do it. I'm not interested in protecting that particular moment of speech right there. Like, that person ought to be taken in for questioning, right?
Yeah.
Like, that speech is not like, oh, you can say whatever you want in this country. You can, but if you say those things, like, and you reveal that you have this sort of very credible threat created, I'm giving a president, or like to a citizen, right? Mm-hmm. Like, those things can be held against you, potentially.
Right.
So, when and again, I mean, we have things like libel and slander that are very real, and I think those things, I think it's good that we have protections against those, because speech we're thinking about it from a government standpoint, but from a private industry, society, business standpoint, if you say a thing that you know to be untrue, and the person that you said it about can show that you saying that caused them like quantifiable harm,
right?
Like, I understand why we have laws against that. Why you can sue somebody for damages, right?
Yeah, right.
Because it's like, well, if I, went up to your house and like quantifiably damaged your house with a baseball bat, and you're like, well, now I have $5,000 worth of repairs. It's like, well, then I should have to pay for that.
Yeah.
So if you can show real monetized damages from somebody putting out things that they knew to be lies, that's actually a big sticking point in libel and slander, is like, it has to be shown that you knew or should reasonably have known that what you were saying was not true. Right. But so all I'm saying is those are the kinds of speech that like, again, within the courts, that gets sorted out as like, no, you can't do that. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really arguing that like people should be able to get away with speech that causes real damage to people, like from a monetized standpoint, or again, a business person can show that person went out and lied about, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So but it is a good question. Like, where do you draw that line?
Right. Well, and who draws
Wilson, it? Go ahead. What were you saying?
No, I was just gonna say, and I mean, who draws the line? That's the big thing too. Is it's like,
right.
Okay, so where is the line? But then who decides? Like, who decides where that line is? Because depending on who's making those decisions, it's going to be completely different. Just going back to what we've been talking about, everyone has their own version of truth now. So it's like,
yes.
Who draws the lines anywhere?
Well, yes, absolutely. And this is what it goes back to, is the government has a monopoly on violence, and it goes back to the danger, like the baked-in danger of federal power. I mean,
right.
Like, the authors, or sort of our founders, were, well, some of them were very suspicious of a kind of federal centralized government power.
Yep.
And the Articles of Confederation reveal that clearly, right? So, pining for the good old days of the Articles of Confederation, right? But so then various ones think that, well, it doesn't give the federal government enough power. You have people like Hamilton and even Madison, right? These other ones are like, we need a stronger central government.
Right.
The net effect of that is, as the nation grows over, centuries, you have this group of elected and unelected people over on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. that control in so many ways the lives of, like, whatever it is now, 350 million people.
Right.
Right? And so I don't really want them saying what I can and can't say. Like, it becomes more, what I'm saying is, I think it becomes more dangerous the more centralized and further away the power gets. I'm not saying tyranny can't happen on a local level, but I think it happens more dangerously the higher up you go in terms of, like, the size of the government and the reach of that government.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's kind of an answer.
That is a really good point. I think it's, as I've gotten older and I've gotten more involved in politics, I just think it is so hard to know what the good balance is between government involvement and not government and less government involvement. Because, on one hand, I feel like you can look back through the past 250 years and see how the more that government has gotten involved, the more people have become more reliant on government. Therefore, they don't know how to self-govern themselves. And so then there's this constant need for more government because people are getting more and more dependent on someone, the government, telling them how to live and what to say and what not to say and all this. And so it's just, it's this toxic cycle that I don't know how it could be stopped, really.
Yeah, gosh, if we knew that, that would,
right.
Well, I don't know if it would help, actually. I don't know if anybody would do anything about it. But yes, I agree. It's become this kind of, self-feeding thing where government just seems to grow.
Right.
And the more people become reliant on it, the worse things seem to get. So I totally agree. And that's why, again, I think the more liberty individual people have, the better. Mm-hmm. And I think the best, like, the places where that flourishes are on the local level. And so,
absolutely.
Again, the federal government originally, as it was created, was pretty small, and the Bill of Rights was passed as, I remember actually, I think it was the first time I learned this term, but Obama really didn't like that our Constitution, or our Bill of Rights was what he called negative rights. In which, like, it restricted the government from doing certain things, right? And he and progressives, Wilson being, like, among the first progressive in terms of, president, but they wanted more like positive rights, things where it's like, you are owed this by the government, right? And but when it was created, it was negative. It was, in other words, like, the government is here to do a very limited set of things, and we're going to make sure that it cannot do these things, right? But as time went on, that grew and kind of has spiraled totally out of control. But the idea was that generally people run their own lives, right? Like
Right.
you live in, you rise and fall based on your own efforts. Of course, you live within a community, right? But that's kind of the point, right? You live within a community, like a family, a household first. I mean, a nation is built on households, right? In fact, the word economy, right, is a Greek word, right? It's two Greek words together, oikos and nomia, right? The law of the household, right? So a nation is built on households, and then households compose communities, and then you kind of go upwards from that. But it's in those communities where I think people thrive, and I think there should be things like communities deciding what they want themselves to look like. And as much as we don't, sometimes people don't like maybe their homeowners association or things like that, I at least appreciate that those are very small and limited, where it's like you could actually leave a homeowners association and move outside of it and still actually live within the same community, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas people go, if you don't like the U.S., I hear this from both sides, actually. I think it's silly. But if you don't like the U.S. or you don't like this law, given law, then just leave. Yeah. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, you can't leave. I mean, you can, right? And some people do. But like those folks, you can't really leave very easily. Not like you could sell your house in this neighborhood and move outside of it because you don't like the homeowners association. Or if you don't like living in city limits because it keeps you from shooting off fireworks, you buy a house or a piece of land outside of city limits, right? And that doesn't like dramatically change your life, and you have to learn a new language and get a new passport and all that stuff, right? And that's why I think federal power is so dangerous and it should be diminished, is because the things that it foists on 350 million people, you can't change, you can't get out from under those things if you find them to be onerous. Even on a state level, I appreciate that, like, again, back to what we were talking about at the beginning, people left California and came out to, like, the Ozarks. Now, that was actually a pretty big life change, but at least they could do that without having to, like, change their citizenship or something, right?
For sure.
So there's competition of ideas among communities and among states, and that's good. And again, that's, I think, a great argument for why federal power should be, whoever it was that said you fit it on the head of a pin, right?
Right.
The government, you could fit on the head of a pin, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there needs to be a very healthy balance, and we're definitely not living in that right now, that's for sure.
Nope.
This is, kind of along the lines, but it's going to go a little bit deeper. Do you have time to answer another question?
Yeah, I got a few minutes. Sure.
Okay. Well, you might not have time for this one. So, like, as with the federal government, with the Constitution being over, the Constitution is over the United States. And so that was one of the reasons for Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was this, executive order that basically, like, according to the Constitution, that black people also have the same rights as white people. And so, it started moving in this direction. So what are your thoughts on with Trump saying that he thinks that abortion should be on the state level, that the Constitution should not be an overall for abortion, just like it was with slavery? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Well, yeah, this one's a hornet's nest. Yeah, you just picked a really non-controversial topic for us to wrap up with.
I know. I thought it'd be great.
I know that you and I think, see this one a little differently. My view on this has changed over the years, actually.
Yeah.
And I'll say, I think two things about that. I think it's two things. I don't actually know. I'm going to say few things about that.
Okay.
One is, I actually do think that generally laws, especially involving crimes, should be like handled on the state level. Mm-hmm. Again, generally speaking, if somebody murders somebody, the federal government does not prosecute them.
True.
Right? Like, generally speaking, right? Like, it's the state government that does that. And in fact, it's the county prosecutor in Missouri that brings charges, and it's like, the state of Missouri, because counties are entities of the state, right? Like created by the state. So state of Missouri versus so-and-so, because you broke a state law, a state statute about that. So I actually think that it makes sense, like that abortion makes sense to belong there, because states make those kinds of decisions and have those kinds of prohibitions or allowances or whatever in all kinds of other areas that seem related. See what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's one reason, I think. I also think that, I'm not saying this should always be why we do things, but I think that it is a pragmatic decision. And time will tell. Maybe something that seems pragmatically good now turns out to have been a terrible decision later. Sure. But I think that it is a pragmatic decision that at least kind of unlocks some of the gridlock and stalemate that we were seeing on the federal national level about this issue, and takes it to a different battlefield. It's still obviously a battlefield, and honestly, interesting outcomes on some states, right? Like Kansas, I think, was it Indiana or Iowa? I forget which one. Have had some outcomes in terms of laws about abortion that maybe you wouldn't have expected, actually. Right. So that's, the battle is still raging. But I actually think in a lot of ways it is a practical, kind of pragmatic decision to go, hey, what if we make, presidential elections especially, about some other issues and move the battle on abortion to the state level? I can understand why a federal politician would want to do that, is what I'm saying. Yeah. And I don't completely fault them for that, because listen, I'm with you that abortion is like a huge issue.
Yeah.
It isn't the only issue in our culture, right? Like, because there's a ton. We've been talking about it for an hour. But it is a huge issue. But I can understand why it could be productive to go, hey, this battle's going to keep raging. I think it should happen on the state level for these reasons. Let's talk about some federal problems that we're facing. I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I can see that too. I mean, I can definitely see specifically why Trump would say leave it on the state level, because if he was, and I mean, it was even being said if he was being rumored to say, like, let's do a federal ban or whatever, and there were clearly lots of people against that, but maybe, if you kind of soften that to say we're actually not going to do a federal ban, it'll just be on the state level, then that kind of gets him off the hook. And this is my perspective, it gets him off the hook, and then so it can draw in those other voters. So I totally do. I totally understand that side of it as well. My thing that has always been is I don't understand how you can use the Constitution to end slavery, but you can't use the Constitution to end abortion, which is also denying the rights of human beings. So that's, and I know, I mean, I opened a huge can of worms on this, but it's because
I hear you.
it's just something that it keeps playing in my head all the time, because it's something I'm very passionate about. But I just don't know. I mean, how do you differentiate that? And not that I'm saying that slavery shouldn't have been ended, because it should have, and I'm glad it was. Right. I just wonder why there's that disconnect of it was okay for this horrible thing, but it's not okay for this horrible thing. This one is just for the states.
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, a whole nother conversation.
Right.
But I do think that there is, and listen, I'm not like actually a big Lincoln fan. Obviously, I'm a fan of ending slavery, but, I'm not like Lincoln's biggest fan for a variety of reasons. But right. Like I will say more broadly, I actually like William Wilberforce as a force for ending slavery. Mm-hmm. And so I think that these kinds of things happen when societies become virtuous and when there's a spiritual awakening in society. Sometimes
absolutely
it may be that you can move the needle a little bit, but the only way to see like real deep change is on the spiritual level, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I 100% agree. Oh, there's so many different ways that I could go from this, but we're at an hour, and I I know that we had said we were going to do 30 minutes, but
that's all right.
I enjoy hearing your perspective on stuff. So I thank you for taking the time this morning to do
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to, you have any closing remarks before we just kind of abruptly end this?
Well, I'll wrap up by just encouraging folks to check out lakeexpo.com, obviously, yep. And to, I will say, avoid trying to find us on Facebook. We really like having folks that are on our email, the Lake Alert, or download the Lake Expo app. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest way to stay connected with us. It's on the App Store and Google Play. Go get the Lake Expo app and stay connected with Lake of the Ozarks, what's happening, and events and news and all the rest.
Right. Do you guys, I was just wondering this actually, do you guys put out any kind of paper publications or is it all online?
Nope, we're just digital, only online.
Yep. Okay. Has it always been that way?
Yeah, for us it has.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, check out Lake Expo. Nathan Bechtold is the editor there. He does a great job. I enjoy reading your articles and just hearing your perspective on stuff that's going on at the lake. But well, thanks for coming in. I hope that you enjoy your weekend, and it should be a pretty pleasant weekend. It's not even 70 degrees yet, so that's nice. Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd love to have you back again sometime, and we can solve more problems.
Absolutely, let's do it. Thanks, Nadine.
Thanks, Nathan. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. So that was, again, Nathan Bechtold with Lake Expo here in the beautiful Lake of the Ozarks. And I know that I opened a huge can of worms there at the very end about the abortion question. But a reason why I wanted to do that is because here in the state of Missouri, post Roe v. Wade, it's basically completely illegal to get a physical abortion in the state of Missouri. However, it is not completely illegal to do a chemical abortion. And so what studies are showing is that specifically in states that are more restrictive like ours, the abortion rates actually aren't really going down. In fact, I had gotten some statistics from this organization called We Vote, which I do not believe, or I'm sorry, it's called We Count. And I don't believe it's any kind of pro-life organization at all. They're just giving some stats. They actually have said that there has been an increase in abortion since Roe v. Wade, and this is because of telehealth, basically. So during COVID, there was this huge boom in telehealth, and people could see their doctor through their computer and get prescriptions that way and all of this. So this was also the case for the abortion pills, mifepredazone. I can never say that very well, but it was for the abortion pills. And so you could have this telehealth appointment with your doctor any doctor, not even just your doctor, but you have this telehealth appointment and you tell them, I'm 6 weeks along, when really you could be, 26 weeks along. I mean, you can totally lie, but you say, I'm 6 weeks along, I want an abortion, boom, they give you this prescription for an abortion pill and you do this stuff at home. You are literally taking the life of your child while you are sitting at home. And there's so many issues with this. But back to what I was saying is that it is very true that you can legislate, down to the very last, to the little things. You can just legislate everything. But if there is not a heart change, then the legislation really isn't going to do as much, right? And that's not me saying like, okay, so let's just not try and protect babies on a legal level. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that people need to understand that just because specifically in the state of Missouri, abortion is quote unquote illegal, there are still a lot of babies losing their lives. And actually, like I said, even more because of the availability of these of chemical abortions. This is one of my biggest issues with Trump and his VP pick, Vance, is that neither one of them are standing strong. In fact, from what I have read of them, they're both basically okay with chemical abortions. I don't know where this major disconnect is happening with people. I don't know if they're thinking like this is the day after pill, which of course is still in a sense taking a life because you are preventing it from happening. I mean, I can get into that another time. I don't know where this major disconnect is happening that people think like, oh, we're going to stop the physical act of an abortion, but we're going to be okay with people getting chemical abortions and committing this murder in their home now. This is a huge, huge issue. And I really hope that since it is on a state-by-state level, that states start understanding how dangerous this is for the people in their state. I mean, these women can do a telehealth appointment with a doctor that's not even in their state. So this is what's happening. There were a few states, New York, California, New York, Colorado, Massachusetts, Washington, and Vermont. They have enacted shield laws that prevent doctors from being prosecuted for prescribing abortion pills for patients in states with abortion bans. I'm reading this. The laws also protect doctors from malpractice litigation following complications. Okay, so in the state of Missouri, you can get a telehealth appointment with a doctor in Colorado and tell them I'm whatever gestational age, which again, you can lie, and because the chemical abortions are only supposed to be done, I believe, in the first trimester, but you can lie. If you're further along, you can say that you're not further along. You can get this chemical abortion sent to you, and you can take it when you are at home, and then you can have severe complications from it. And the doctors I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted because I have a phone call coming in. I'm going to answer this real quick. Oh, I just missed you. Sorry, you can call back in. And the doctors are protected from Missouri state laws, but they're also protected from any kind of complication that this woman might have when she took the abortion pill, which there are often severe complications like hemorrhaging or sepsis. Like I said, it's a huge issue that really needs to be addressed. Okay, so I have a caller coming back in. I'm going to answer this. Hello, this is Nadine at 9.
Hello, Nadine. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Hey, fascinating conversation. I caught the tail end of it there with, I guess that was Nathan Bechtold. Is that right?
It was Nathan Bechtold, yes, from Lake Expo.
Yeah, a lot of good questions there, and I thought he had some really intelligent responses, so that's nice.
I enjoyed it.
I wanted to just comment on the topic of the Constitution and abortion and slavery that you've been discussing.
Yes.
And, well, the 13th and 14th Amendment actually specifically prohibit that.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like we're probably going to have a constitutional amendment for a federal ban on abortion. And I don't know that will ever occur in our lifetimes unless we can prove that life begins at conception, and I don't know that we've been able to actually prove that. We believe that,
right?
But is there any actual evidence that proves that? And so until we actually do that, it seems we're stuck in an impasse here.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I completely agree. It would have to be an amendment. But the way that they were able to get that amendment was through saying, like, the Constitution already says, like, these people should have the same rights as others. And so that's more of my thing, is that I feel like the Constitution should also pave the way to have an abortion amendment, just like there was an anti-slavery amendment.
Right. Well, I think if, modern medicine is improving all the time, and I think they have got something like down to 18 days they can detect a heartbeat, And so if the absence of a heartbeat is not life, then heartbeat must be life. And so I think 18 days is about where we're at now. But if you can get that down to, a day or two or whatever the case may be, then I think you have something to challenge, maybe all the way to the Supreme Court, and say, look, this is life, and it is protected under the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I think that would be the way to go.
Right.
Because I just don't see another amendment to the Constitution happening. The country is in such gridlock.
Oh yeah.
There's no way that's probably going to happen. And so we have to rely on, other ways to go about it, I guess. But
yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I appreciate you calling in, because it is a huge issue, and obviously we would all like for there to just be a heart change, because we've seen, just with Kamala Harris's VP pick, he has even talked for like post-birth abortion. So at that point, it's like clearly he doesn't even care if it's a human being or not. If it's an inconvenience, he thinks you should be able to get rid of it. And so I don't even know that necessarily proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that life actually is beginning at conception, I don't even know if at this point in our country if that would even help, because there are several states that are fine with abortion up to the time of birth, and some of them even afterward. And so that's just where we're at, and that's awful. But I agree with you. There definitely would need to be some kind of an amendment, and our country is so polarized right now.
Yeah, and I think it's important that when you talk about those, that is so terrible of an extreme position, and that they need to be called out for that. If you're going to say, okay, this is a baby that is born and you're just going to let it die, that's murder. It is. Mm-hmm. That is murder, and they need to be called out for that. That is a terribly extreme position, and we need to call them out for that. Absolutely. And call them to be extremists, because that's what they are.
Absolutely.
And we have to start talking in those types of terms.
Right. Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
All right, good show. Let you go.
Thanks for calling in. I appreciate it.
Yep, take care.
Have a good one. Yeah, anyone is welcome to call in, 573-746-8020. I enjoy listening to other people's perspectives and point of view. I really do. I am very solid in core values. So, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to listen to someone else's perspective, because I always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. So I welcome that. Feel free to call in. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the abortion issue, specifically with chemical abortions, because I just feel like it's being overlooked in so many places. There are so many conservative outlets that are championing Trump and Vance as these mega pro-life people, when they're missing the biggest issue of abortion right now is chemical abortions. And it's not even just, for the baby that's being aborted, but the moms who are doing these things. If you're getting this chemical abortion, I don't even want to say medicine, but this chemical abortion from a telehealth doctor, what are you supposed to do when you start hemorrhaging and you're sitting at home in your bathroom? Did they go through all of the possible scenarios that could happen with you? I kind of doubt it. I don't have a lot of faith in the medical system right now. So I highly doubt that they're actually educating these women on what it is that they're actually doing and all of the crazy scenarios that could come out of it. There's a story for another day, but I actually have heard firsthand account of a woman who had come into the pregnancy center here in Camdenton, and she had gone through this. She had gotten a chemical abortion, and she had a severe reaction from it. And like, this stuff is actually happening. This stuff is real. And like I said, chemical abortions have actually made the abortion rate rise since Roe v. Wade, because there are these states where it's easily accessible to get the abortion pills. And so, you know, someone from Missouri can just go and get that. And it doesn't really matter what our state says. They can go to a different state and do that. This data that I have says that it's 2 out of 3 abortions at this point, which they're in the first quarter of 2024, it was 100,000, nearly 100,000 per month in the first quarter of 2024, which if you do 100,000 times 12, that's 1.2 million babies. It's just so unreal to me that this is happening, and it's still happening. I mean, 1.2 million people are being killed in our country. And nothing's being, and in my view, like, there's hardly anything being done about it. And we have this great champion of the people, supposedly, who's saying he's pro-life, and all the while, we're still losing 1.2 million babies in this world. I mean, I would love for someone to call Trump out on this and say, we need you to lead the charge with this platform that God has given you to say, no more. We're not going to allow the loss of these 1.2 million babies anymore. We're not going to allow the chemical abortions anymore. It's killing babies. A lot of times it destroys a mom physically with whatever severe issues come from taking these pills and not having the proper medical care. I mean, the fact that these states also enacted laws to protect them from any of the harmful side effects that come when these women take the abortion pill, how in the world is that responsible medical care? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I don't know how you can take this oath to protect, to whatever the doctor's oath is, something about, protecting and healing life, or I'm totally butchering that. But whatever it is, how can they say that and do that and act like this is what they're abiding by, but then they're sending out these abortion pills to women and they're completely protected from any kind of issue that the woman might have? That is ridiculous. That should not be happening in 2024 United States. That's absolutely ridiculous. But it's going to take some really loud voices saying, wait a second, these chemical abortions are the issue, and we need to address it. So, coming up in Missouri, there is going to be an amendment question on the ballot to amend our Constitution to allow for abortions under the guise of reproductive rights. That is what it means, is abortion. However, there is more to it than that as well. It gets even better. I'm going to have some guests on over the next few weeks leading up to the November election, because I want to make sure that, at least in our community, everyone is very, very well educated on what exactly this amendment does, because it's bad enough with the abortion side of it. There's also a transgender side with children side of it. So I'm going to give you just a little teaser with that, I mean, this is serious. And if you are a follower of Christ and you read scripture and that is the truth that you live by, then there is no excuse for you to sit silent on this issue, because you need to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And when the righteous do nothing, the wicked rule, and the people groan. And that's what's happening right now, is that for too long, the righteous have sat silent, and we have to speak up. This is an issue that you cannot stay silent on. So I just want to challenge you that if you are part of a church community, encourage them to educate their people on this amendment that's going to be coming up. I will talk more about it, like I said, in the coming weeks. It's very serious, and we have to protect not only the lives of these unborn babies, but the lives of that the abortion affects so many people. It affects the mother, it affects the father, it affects siblings, it affects future siblings, it affects grandparents, it affects the doctors that do it. I mean, this affects everybody. And it also just, it deprives our country of thousands and millions of children. So this is serious. We need to pay attention to it, and I will be discussing it quite a bit over the next few weeks. So I hope that you not only continue to tune in, but please have other people start listening as well, and hopefully we can continue to fight for life in Missouri, and that we can be a beacon of hope to the rest of the country. So that's about all that I have for you today. I know that I am now at almost the 90-minute mark, so I've been trying to figure out how long I think that my show should go, and it's been a bit of a struggle for me because I'm trying to balance between not giving too much information, but also giving enough information. Obviously, I just had almost an hour-long phone call with Nathan, because there's just so many things to talk about all the time, I feel like. And I enjoy having really good conversation with people who sometimes have different perspectives than me. So anyway, I'm probably going to be about the 90-minute mark every week. So Nadine at 9 for 90 is what I'm going to call my show from now on. It's a nice little tongue twister. But I hope that you continue to tune in, and that you would, if you do enjoy what you're hearing, or maybe even if you don't, go ahead and just share it with someone else, because maybe they'll enjoy it. And, sometimes when you don't enjoy something, you just can't help but listen to it, because, it's kind of like a train wreck. You can't turn away. So maybe that's how I am to you. Either way, I'll take it, because that means that you're listening. So I thank you for listening to me, and I will have the show uploaded to my YouTube channel again, and probably later today or tomorrow, and then I will post that as well. And if you want to share the show with someone else, or if you want to re-listen to it, because I have such an amazing voice. Anyway, I am going to turn off here. I did actually want to mention one other thing real quick from the election results on Tuesday. There were 2 amendments on the ballot that I actually haven't heard publicized a whole bunch how those went, and so I wanted to make sure that those of you in Missouri knew what had happened. The amendment question for the child care tax exemption, that amendment did not pass, thankfully. And then the amendment for the funding increase of the Kansas City Police Department, that amendment did pass. It was very close, which I was encouraged by, because as Miss A and I had discussed last week, we had some concerns with creating that amendment, and so I was glad to see that there were several other people that seemed to have that concern as well, and weren't just trying to rubber stamp things through. It's important for people to ask questions and for there to be answers before we change our amendment or our Constitution. So anyway, I wanted to make sure that people knew that the child care tax exemption amendment did not pass. The Kansas City Police Department funding increase did pass. And there were several really good grassroots wins throughout the state of getting the establishment swamp seats taken away and given to some, what seems like some really solid, conservative, and oftentimes Christian men and women who will hopefully go in there and be a positive influence up in Jeff City. I know it's going to be very difficult for them as coming in as new blood, but just if you would join me in praying for those men and women, they are willing to serve. It's not a high-paying job. It's not glamorous. And especially going in with more of a grassroots, small government mindset, they're going to have a lot of trials that they face. So just pray for them. Pray also for our federal government. They desperately need our prayers, both sides of it, because our country needs to return to the Lord. And I think that if we had someone leading our country who was encouraging that, then, the rest of the country might follow that a little bit more. Ultimately, we have to look to the Lord and Scripture for our guidance, but God puts these people in place for a reason. So let's elect godly men and women to lead us and to hopefully make a difference in our country. Well, I'm coming to you live from Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio, and I just wanted to remind you that until next time, let's not act like children.